The signal was older than the Republic itself, older than the founding charter signed at Viridian Prime, older than the Concord of 12, older than the Great Silence that swallowed the progenitors, older than any recorded history in any data vault across the 1,000 recognized star systems. The transmission had been broadcasting continuously for 8,472 standard years before the first council assembled. It had been broadcasting for 3,000 years before the first FTL drive ever sputtered to life in a Xylorian engineering bay. No one had answered it. No one had even wanted to. Kalen Voss stared at the waveform on his display, his fingers frozen above the navigation panel, and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Curiosity, not the clinical academic kind he had learned to fake during his brief and disastrous tenure at the Galactic Institute of Xenohistorical Studies, not the cynical, calculating kind that drove salvage hunters to pick through the bones of dead civilizations for resaleable artifacts. This was something older, something primal, a pull in his chest that had nothing to do with profit or reputation or any of the other reasons people crawled across this dying galaxy in tin cans held together by weld beams and hope. The signal was wrong. That was the first thing every receiver logged when it first detected the transmission. The mathematics didn't line up. The modulation pattern suggested a carrier wave architecture that predated the development of subspace compression by at least 6 millennia. The encryption handshake, and there was an encryption handshake which alone should have been impossible for a beacon that old, used a prime number sequence that no known species had ever employed. The signal shouldn't exist. It shouldn't still be broadcasting. It certainly shouldn't have been ignored for 80 centuries by every major government, every scientific body, every military intelligence division that had ever analyzed its metadata and promptly filed it under irrelevant extinct origin. The Republic's official position was simple. The civilization that built that beacon was gone. Whatever they had been warning about, whatever they had been asking for, whatever they had been trying to preserve, it no longer mattered. The past was the past. The galaxy had moved on. Kalen had heard that argument 100 times during his years at the Institute. He had read the dismissal memos. He had watched brilliant scholars shrug their shoulders at the signal's impossible age and turn back to more profitable research, more fundable projects, more politically convenient mysteries. The dead could not pay grants. The dead could not elevate your academic standing. The dead were simply dead, and the living galaxy had better things to do than listen to a ghost. But Kalen was human, and humans, as the galaxy had learned over the past 2 centuries of reluctant coexistence, had a terrible habit of doing things that made no logical sense. His ship, the Last Gaze, was not designed for long-range exploration. It was a refitted cargo hauler with mismatched thrusters, a life support system that smelled faintly of recycled desperation, and a navigation computer that had been patched together from 3 different wreckages. He had bought it for less than the cost of a decent apartment on any core world, and he had spent the last 4 years flying it through the forgotten corners of the galaxy, taking odd jobs, running obscure errands, and quietly ignoring the voice in his head that said he was wasting his life. That voice had gone silent the moment the signal touched his receivers. He had been passing through the Orus Expanse, a stretch of uninhabited space so unremarkable that even pirates avoided it, when the long-range comm array picked up something unusual. Not unusual in the way that most deep space transmissions were unusual. Distorted, degraded, half-eaten by cosmic background radiation. Unusual in the way that it was perfectly clear. 8,000 years of broadcasting, and the signal was pristine. No degradation, no corruption, no cumulative data loss. The waveform was as clean as if it had been transmitted yesterday. That alone should have triggered every alert in the Republic's early warning network. Instead, Kalen's databanks showed that the signal had been flagged as a known phenomenon, automatically filtered by his ship's noise reduction protocols, and almost deleted before he had overridden the system. He pulled up the file that had been attached to the signal's identifier code. A single page of bureaucratic dismissal, signed by a Republic archivist 3 centuries ago. Source unknown. Age, estimated 8,472 years. Status, extinct. Recommendation, no action required. No action required. 80 centuries of a dead civilization screaming into the void, and the galaxy's official response was a shrug. Kalen leaned back in his crash couch and stared at the waveform for a long time. The last gaze drifted through the darkness, her engines cold, her systems idling. Outside the viewport, the stars were so dense they looked like a wound that had never stopped bleeding. He thought about his father, who had died chasing a distress signal that turned out to be a pulsar's echo. He thought about his mother, who had told him never to let the galaxy's indifference become his own. He thought about the Institute and the professors who had laughed at his thesis proposal on pre-Republic civilizations, and the funding committee that had rejected his grant application with a single word written in red across the cover page. Irrelevant. He thought about 8,000 years of unanswered prayer. Then he plotted a course and engaged the FTL drive. The signal's origin point lay beyond the galactic rim, in a region of space so remote that not even the most ambitious colonial expeditions had ever bothered to chart it. The Republic's official star maps showed nothing there. No trade routes, no habitable worlds, no strategic resources. Just a vast, empty darkness that the galaxy had collectively decided was not worth the fuel required to cross it. Kalen's navigation computer disagreed. As he drew closer to the coordinates embedded in the signal's carrier wave, the maps began to fill with unexpected data, gravimetric anomalies that suggested mass where no mass should exist, radiation signatures that matched no known stellar process, electromagnetic interference patterns that looked almost, but not quite, shield harmonics. Something was out here. Something big. Something that had been hiding for a very long time. The first leg of the journey took 11 standard days. Kalen spent them sleeping in shifts, monitoring his sensors, and trying to ignore the growing unease in his gut. The signal grew stronger with every light year he crossed. By the 5th day, it was no longer a background whisper but a constant presence, thrumming through the last gaze's hull like a second heartbeat. By the 8th day, he could feel it in his teeth. On the 11th day, he found the gate. It was a structure of impossible scale, a ring of dark metal so vast that it dwarfed the nearby star. The star itself was wrong. Too dim, too cold, too old for its position in the galactic arm. It burned with a tired orange light that seemed to struggle against the surrounding darkness, and Kalen realized with a chill that the star was dying. Not in the violent, spectacular way that supernovae announced their passing. This star was simply fading, its fusion reactions sputtering like a candle in a vacuum. The ring surrounded it at a distance of approximately 40 million kilometers. From Kalen's position, it looked like a halo bent by gravity, a perfect circle etched into the fabric of space. Its surface was covered in symbols, thousands upon thousands of symbols, each one carved with a precision that no known manufacturing process could replicate. The symbols were not language in any conventional sense. They were equations, mathematical proofs, geometric relationships encoded into physical form, and they were old. Even from here, Kalen could see the pitting, the micrometeor scarring, the slow erosion of cosmic radiation. This structure had been here for a very, very long time. Longer than the signal. Longer than the star it orbited. Longer than anything in the Republic's historical records. He brought the last gaze to a halt at what he hoped was a safe distance, and ran every scan his ship could perform. The results made no sense. The ring's composition was unknown, not unknown in the sense of unidentified alloy, but unknown in the sense of this material does not appear in any known periodic table. Its internal structure suggested power conduits, data networks, and environmental systems, but none of them were active. The ring was dead, cold, hollow. But the signal was coming from inside it. Kalen sat in silence for a long time, staring at the data. Every rational part of his mind was screaming at him to turn around. This was not a salvage operation. This was not an archaeological expedition. This was something else entirely. Something he had no training for, no equipment for, no backup for. He was alone, in a region of space that had never been explored, staring at a structure built by a civilization that had died before his own species had evolved language. The smart thing to do was to record everything, transmit the data back to Republic space, and wait for someone with more resources and less recklessness to take over. But Kalen had never been very good at doing the smart thing. He fired the maneuvering thrusters and began the long, slow approach. The ring did not have a docking bay. It did not have any obvious entrances at all. Kalen spent 3 hours circling the structure, running his sensors along its surface, looking for any gap or seam or anomaly that might lead inside. He found nothing. The ring was seamless, a single unbroken curve of unknown metal stretching for millions of kilometers. Then he noticed the symbol. It was one of thousands carved into the ring's inner surface near what he had started thinking of as the top. Though in the absence of any meaningful orientation, that word had lost its usual meaning. The symbol was no different from any of the others at first glance. Same mathematical precision, same unknown script, same evidence of cosmic erosion, but the area around it was warmer. Not by much, a fraction of a degree barely above the background temperature of space, but warmer. And when Kalen focused his highest resolution scanners on that single point, he saw something that made his heart skip. The metal was different there, not in composition, but in state. Where the rest of the ring was cold and dead, this tiny patch of metal was almost waiting, as if it had been designed to respond to something specific, and had been holding that readiness for 8,000 years. Kalen thought about the signal, about its encryption handshake, about the prime number sequence that no known species had ever employed. He pulled up the sequence on his display and transmitted it toward the warmer patch of metal on a tight beam carrier wave. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ring woke up. There was no sound in space, but Kalen felt it anyway. A vibration that traveled through the last gaze's hull, through the crash couch, through his bones. Lights flickered along the ring's inner surface, thousands of them, millions of them, a cascade of illumination that spread outward from the warmer patch like ripples in a pond. The equations carved into the metal began to glow, soft blue at first, then brighter, then blinding. The ring was not dead. It had been sleeping. And Kalen had just said the password. A section of the ring's inner surface irised open, revealing a tunnel of impossible depth. The tunnel was not dark. It was filled with light, the same soft blue glow that now covered the ring's surface, and it seemed to extend forever, a corridor leading into the heart of the structure. Kalen's sensors could not measure its length. The tunnel did not appear in any of his scans. It was there, and then it was not. An impossibility made manifest. The signal's source was somewhere inside. Kalen took a breath, then another. Then he engaged the thrusters and flew into the light. The tunnel was longer than he had expected. Hours passed, then days. The last gaze flew through an endless corridor of blue-lit metal, her sensors blind, her navigation computer spinning useless calculations that led nowhere. Kalen stopped checking the time after the first 12 hours. He stopped eating after the first day. He simply sat in the crash couch, watching the walls slide past, and tried not to think about how far he had traveled, or how little he understood about where he was going. The signal was everywhere now. Not just on his receivers, but in the hum of the ship's systems, in the vibration of the hull, in the very air he breathed. It had stopped being a transmission and started being an environment, a presence. On the third day, the tunnel ended. Kalen emerged into a space so vast that his mind refused to process it. The chamber, if it could be called a chamber, stretched in every direction for distances that light itself would take hours to cross. Its walls were covered in the same glowing equations he had seen on the ring's exterior, but here the symbols were moving, shifting, rearranging themselves in patterns that seemed almost intelligent. The floor was a lattice of light and shadow, translucent and solid at the same time, and somewhere below it, so far down that it might as well have been in another universe. Kalen could see the dying star's tired orange glow. And at the center of the chamber, suspended in the void, was a ship. No, not a ship. A vessel, certainly, but nothing like any ship Kalen had ever seen. It was organic and mechanical at the same time, its hull a fusion of metal and something that looked almost like bone, its shape asymmetrical in ways that hurt to look at. It was massive, larger than the last gaze by a factor of 100, but it had been built for something. Purpose radiated from it like heat from a flame. The signal was coming from inside that vessel. Kalen brought his ship to a halt and stared. The vessel did not move, did not react, did not even seem to acknowledge his presence. It simply hung there, waiting, as it had been waiting for 8,000 years. He tried to raise it on comms. Nothing. He tried to scan it. His sensors returned static. He tried to transmit the prime number sequence again, hoping for a response, for any sign of life. The vessel's hull began to open, not like a door, like a flower. Sections of the bone metal surface peeled back, revealing chambers within chambers, corridors within corridors, a labyrinth of impossible architecture that seemed to unfold into itself. At the center of this unfolding was a docking cradle, small, almost intimate, designed for exactly the kind of ship Kalen was flying. He did not hesitate. He was long past hesitation. He guided the last gaze into the cradle, felt the clamps engage, heard the hiss of atmosphere equalizing around his hull. Then the lights went out. When they came back on, Kalen was no longer in his ship. He was standing in a corridor that could have been plucked from any space station in the galaxy. Standard lighting, standard flooring, standard air pressure and temperature and humidity. The only unusual thing was the silence. No hum of life support, no click of relays, no distant footsteps of other crew members. Just silence and the fading echo of his own breathing. He checked his environment suit. Atmosphere was breathable. Temperature was comfortable. Gravity was within 1/10 of a standard G. Whatever this place was, someone had designed it for organic life. Someone had wanted visitors to feel at home. Someone had been waiting for a very long time. The corridor led to a door. The door opened when he approached, and beyond it was a room that took his breath away. It was a library, not a digital archive. A physical library with shelves and shelves of books, data crystals, carved tablets, woven tapestries, every information storage medium that had ever existed in the galaxy's long history. The room was circular, its walls lined with these artifacts, and at its center was a pedestal. On the pedestal was a single object, a sphere, no larger than Kalen's fist, made of a material that shifted colors as he watched. The sphere was warm to the touch, and it was speaking, not in words, not in sounds, directly into his mind, in a language that was not language but meaning, pure and distilled. Kalen understood it the way he understood his own heartbeat, without translation, without effort, without doubt. "Welcome, child of Earth. We have been waiting for you." Kalen tried to speak. His voice came out as a croak. "Who are you?" "We are the first ones, the builders, the ones who came before all others. We have been gone for a very long time." "Gone?" Kalen looked around the library at the artifacts, at the sphere in his hands. "You're not gone. You're right here. This is an echo, a recording, a message encoded into matter and light. We are not alive in the way you understand life. We have not been alive for 8,000 years. 8,000 years. The signal, the ring, the vessel, all of it had been built by a civilization that had known it was dying and had chosen to leave behind a message for whoever came next." "Why?" Kalen asked. "Why build all of this? Why wait so long? What were you trying to say?" The sphere pulsed with light, and suddenly Kalen was somewhere else. He was standing on a world that was burning, not from fire, from light. A star was dying overhead, its death throes sending torrents of radiation across the planet's surface, boiling oceans, vaporizing mountains, turning the sky into a canvas of white-hot fury. And below that sky, a civilization was making its final stand. The first ones were beautiful. They had no fixed form. They shifted between shapes as easily as humans shifted between thoughts, their bodies made of light and sound and something that looked almost like music given physical presence. They moved through the burning world with a grace that made Kalen's heart ache, and they were talking to each other in a language of color and vibration that he could almost understand. They were saying goodbye. The star's death had not been natural. It had been murdered. Something had reached into the heart of that ancient sun and torn out its fusion reactions, scattering them across the system like shrapnel. The first ones had tried to stop it. They had thrown everything they had against the thing that was killing their star, and they had failed. They were not dying because they were weak. They were dying because they had been ambushed. The thing that had killed their star was still out there, waiting, watching. And the first ones had realized too late that they were not the first civilization it had destroyed. They had found the ruins of others, scattered across the galaxy like bones in a graveyard, each one killed by the same method, the same attacker, the same patient, ancient hunger. The first ones could not defeat it. They could not even slow it down. But they could leave a warning. They built the ring. They built the vessel. They encoded their knowledge into matter and light, knowing that it would take thousands of years for anyone to find it, hoping that whoever came next would be stronger, smarter, more prepared. They wrote their equations into the ring's surface not as decoration but as a key, a cryptographic lock that only an advanced civilization could open, ensuring that whoever found them would be worthy of their legacy. And then they waited. Not the first ones themselves, they were gone, their forms scattered to the cosmic winds, their consciousnesses dissolved into the background radiation of the universe. But their message waited. Their warning waited. Their plea for help, transmitted on a loop for 80 centuries, waiting for someone, anyone, to answer. Kalen came back to himself in the library, gasping, the sphere still warm in his hands. "You want us to fight it," he said. "This thing that killed your star. You want humanity to fight it. We want you to survive. We want all of you to survive. The thing that killed us will not stop. It will never stop. It has been hunting civilizations since before this galaxy was born, and it will continue hunting until there is nothing left to hunt. You cannot hide from it, you cannot negotiate with it, you can only fight." Kalen thought about the Republic, about its endless bureaucracy, its petty politics, its insistence that the past was irrelevant. He thought about the signal, dismissed for 80 centuries, ignored by everyone who had ever heard it. He thought about the first ones who had died screaming into the void, hoping that someone would listen. He thought about the thing that had killed them, still out there, still waiting, still hungry. "We're not ready," he said. "Humanity has only been in space for 200 years. The Republic has only been around for 6,000. We don't have the technology, the resources, You have something better." "What?" You answered. The flight back to Republic space took 18 days. Kalen spent them in a daze, replaying the first one's message over and over, trying to figure out what to do next. The sphere was in his cargo hold, still warm, still pulsing with that impossible light. The ring was behind him, its secrets unlocked, its purpose finally fulfilled. He was carrying the weight of 80 centuries. When he emerged from FTL at the edge of the Viridian system, his comms were immediately flooded with hails. Republic patrol ships, customs inspectors, military intelligence officers. They had detected his jump, tracked his trajectory, realized that he had gone somewhere no one was supposed to go. They wanted answers. Kalen gave them the sphere. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. The Republic's best scientists spent 3 weeks trying to understand the first one's technology, their language, their warning. The military spent 3 weeks trying to suppress the story. The politicians spent 3 weeks arguing about who should be blamed for ignoring the signal for so long. And then the scans came back. The thing that had killed the first ones was still out there. It was closer than anyone had realized. It had been moving toward the galactic core for centuries, consuming stars, extinguishing civilizations, leaving behind nothing but cold and darkness. It would reach the Republic's outer colonies in less than a decade. Panic spread like fire through dry grass. Kalen watched it all from the window of a cramped administrative office, where he had been debriefed, interrogated, and debriefed again by a rotating cast of officials who all wanted to know the same thing. Why had he answered the signal when no one else had? He gave them the same answer every time. Because someone had to. The war did not go well at first. The thing, they called it the Devourer, because that was the closest translation of the first one's word for it, was unlike anything the Republic had ever faced. It had no ships, no armies, no territory to conquer. It had only hunger and the ability to reach into stars and tear out their hearts. The Republic's fleets were useless against it. Weapons that could shatter planets did nothing to a thing that existed partly outside normal space. Shields that could withstand supernovas collapsed like paper when the Devourer's attention turned toward them. The galaxy's best minds threw everything they had at the enemy, and nothing worked. The Republic was dying, not in a day or a year, but slowly, inexorably, star by star, the same way the first ones had died. The same way countless other civilizations had died, their ruins scattered across the galaxy like warnings that no one had heeded. And then a human pilot who had answered an old distress signal stood up in front of the Republic Council and said, "You're doing it wrong." The council chamber went silent. Kalen had not been invited to speak. He had forced his way past the guards, ignoring their weapons, their threats, their protests. He was not a commander. He was not a politician. He was just a man with a cargo hauler and a stubborn refusal to let the galaxy die. "The first ones didn't lose because they were weak," he said, his voice echoing off the chamber's ancient walls. "They lost because they tried to fight the Devourer on its own terms. They threw energy at it, matter, weapons, everything they had, and it ate it all." "Then what do you suggest?" one of the counselors demanded. She was a Xylorian, her skin the color of dried blood, her eyes burning with frustration. "We've tried everything. Nothing works." "You haven't tried the signal." The chamber erupted. The signal was old. The signal was irrelevant. The signal had been analyzed, dismissed, filed away. What could it possibly do against a cosmic predator that had been hunting civilizations since before time had a name? Kalen waited for the noise to die down. Then he told them what he had discovered in the first one's library, in those long hours after the sphere had finished its message. The signal was not just a warning. It was a weapon. The first ones had designed it to attract not just any civilization, but the right civilization, one that was stubborn enough to answer, curious enough to investigate, and compassionate enough to care. The encryption handshake was not a test of intelligence, it was a test of empathy. The prime number sequence was not a code, it was a question. "Will you help us?" The Devourer could not be destroyed. The first ones had proven that, but it could be redirected. It could be tricked. It could be led away from inhabited systems, away from dying stars, into the empty spaces between galaxies where there was nothing to eat and no one to kill. The signal contained the bait. A false star, a phantom sun, a lure so perfect that the Devourer would not be able to resist it. The first ones had created it in their final days, encoded it into the transmission, and broadcast it into the void. All anyone had to do was answer, and the lure would activate. But answering required empathy. It required curiosity. It required a species that looked at an ancient distress signal and saw not an irrelevant relic, but a cry for help. The Republic had never answered because the Republic did not care. The Xylorians didn't care. The Veth, the Cathar, the Meridian Compact, none of them cared. They had looked at the signal and seen a ghost. Something dead. Something irrelevant. Only humanity had answered. "Build the lure," Kalen said. "Broadcast it from every transmitter you have. Point it toward the galactic rim and push. The Devourer will follow." "Follow where?" the Xylorian counselor asked. "Follow me." The last gaze had not been designed for this. She was still a refitted cargo hauler with mismatched thrusters and a life support system that smelled like recycled desperation. But Kalen had patched her up, upgraded her engines, reinforced her hull. He had installed the first one's sphere in the navigation bay, wired it directly into the ship's power grid, and let its impossible light guide his course. He was flying into the dark. Not the dark of interstellar space, but the dark between galaxies where there were no stars, no planets, no life. The Devourer was behind him, following the lure, following the false star that the first ones had created 80 centuries ago, and Kalen was leading it away. It would take years, decades, centuries maybe. The distance between galaxies was measured in millions of light-years, and even with the best FTL drive the Republic could build, the journey was almost incomprehensibly long. But the Devourer would follow. It had no choice. The lure was perfect, designed to exploit every instinct, every hunger, every blind spot in the Predator's ancient mind. And Kalen would fly ahead of it, always ahead, always just out of reach, the signal broadcasting from his ship's comm array like a lighthouse in the void. He was not a hero. He would tell you that himself if you asked. He was just a man who had heard a cry for help and refused to ignore it. The Republic gave him a medal. They named a star after him. They erected statues in every major city, commissioned holodocumentaries, wrote songs about the human pilot who had saved the galaxy from a threat older than time. Kalen never saw any of it. By the time the first statue was unveiled, he was already beyond the galactic rim, flying into the dark, the last gaze's engines burning bright against the endless night. Behind him, the Devourer followed. Ahead of him there was nothing but empty space, and the faint, fading echo of a distress signal that was older than the Republic. A signal that had finally, after 80 centuries, been answered. The last transmission from the last gaze arrived at the edge of Republic space 311 years after Kalen Voss left the Viridian system. It was weak, distorted, almost lost in the cosmic background noise. But the words were clear. This is Kalen Voss, pilot of the independent vessel Last Gaze. The Devourer is still following. I am still leading. The lure is holding. Do not attempt to follow. Do not attempt to retrieve. This is my flight now. This is my watch. To anyone who finds this transmission, answer the signals, all of them, even the old ones, even the ones that seem irrelevant. You never know who might be listening. Humanity, signing off. The transmission ended. The silence that followed was absolute. And somewhere in the dark between galaxies, a lone human pilot continued flying. His ship's comm array broadcasting a lure for an ancient hunger, his eyes fixed on a horizon that no one else would ever see. He had answered the signal. He would never stop answering it, not until the stars themselves went dark and the last light in the universe was the glow of his engines, carrying hope into the void. Humanity had answered, and that made all the difference.